Next we have a self-massage for the hip flexor. The hip flexor is found in the front of the hip. There's a bone here, and if you move on the inside of the bone, then you should find the hip flexor. The starting position will be the tennis ball placed down and in, both hands over top of it. You're going to press down into the tennis ball to find a tender area, moving either up and down or side to side, holding it for 10 to 15 breath cycles, and you can move to find a few different areas of tenderness. We have a self-massage for the glutes or the piriformis. The piriformis runs in a line like this. You're going to use the tennis ball, so this would be the starting position. The end position is up against the wall. Wedge the tennis ball into a tender area and move your hips side to side or up and down. And you can move different spots 2 to 4 times, accumulating 10 to 15 breath cycles. Self-mobilization of thoracic extension, foam rolling. So starting position is here, knees bent up. Give yourself a hug. And Brandon's going to roll up and down on the foam roll. This acts as a massage to the low back and mid back muscles. Go up and down 10 to 15 times. The next position is going to be bottom on the ground. And he's going to work on extending over top of the foam roll on 3 different levels. So here's one level. He's going to move down and show another level. The goal here is to extend through your thorax, not through your low back or through your neck. So try to keep your chin tucked as you go through that movement, taking deep breath in and out. He's going to roll down a little bit further and try to extend over top. Keep the chin tucked and then come out of it. And then the last component of this self-mobilization is going to be arm raise. So he's in extension and then he's going to raise one arm over top. Breathing in, out on the way down, and then the other arm can raise, keeping that chin tucked, extending over top, and then coming out of it. Next we have a self-mobilization for lumbar flexion. Brandon's going to grab both of his hips or knees and pull them into his chest. He should feel a stretch into his low back and into his glutes. We're doing both legs at the same time so that he feels more of a strong stretch or self-mobility exercise in his lumbar spine. Now we have a static stretch for hip flexion. So Brandon's bringing his knee into his shoulder. You should feel the stretch into the glutes, not the front of the hip. If he were to feel this pain in the front of the hip, I would get him to hold off a little bit and hold the stretch there for 10 to 15 breath cycles. We have a static stretch for the piriformis, the glutes, or the rotators. The stretch should be felt in the back side here. This is the starting position, and the end position should look something like this. So he's grabbed the opposite knee to increase the stretch here. He could also come off of it and pull on this knee into his opposite shoulder to increase the stretch here. He could also push the knee away from him to try to increase the stretch into his hip. You have 3 different options. Hold it for 10 to 15 breath cycles. We have a stretch for hip internal rotation. You should feel the stretch from here down to here. Starting position is this. End position is this. You should feel a stretch in your low back. You should feel a stretch from the hip down. Trying to keep your low back somewhat neutral throughout the movement. Holding this for 10 to 15 breath cycles. Next we have a static stretch for the hip adductors. So starting position is here. End position, he's going to spread his legs apart. The stretch should be felt on the inside of the groin, and you're holding this for 10 to 15 breath cycles. Self-mobilization of thoracic rotation in an archery stretch or pose. So the top leg is bent up to 90 degrees, the back leg is bent back to 90 degrees to lock your hips in. He's going to start with this hand on that hand. So starting position is there. End position is as he rotates away from the hand. He should feel a strong stretch in his rib cage or thorax. Breathe in, breathe out, and then finish the movement. Back into the starting position. We'll do one more. Breathe in, out, and then finish the movement. We have a self-mobility exercise for the lumbar spine, working on flexion and extension, also called the heel hand rock. Starting position is here. End position for extension is going to look like this. So he's getting neck extension, thoracic extension, and the reverse curve in his lumbar spine. He's trying to drive his hips down into the ground. And then the end position for flexion will look like this, where he brings his bottom to his heels. He's allowing flexion to happen here, a reverse or flexion curve here, and he's just trying to bring his arms down to the ground. A couple breath cycles there, and then he can go back into extension. Couple breath cycles at each end of range of motion, and repeat this 10 to 15 times. So this is a static stretch for his right hip flexor. The area of stretch should be right in this area here. Starting position is this. The end position is this. The idea here is to keep your tailbone tucked underneath you and then drive the hips forward. So come back, work on that tailbone tuck, and then come forward until the tension is felt in the hip flexor. Stop there and hold the stretch for 10 to 15 breath cycles. You could also increase the stretch by putting the right arm up and above your head and side bending to the left to increase the stretch on this whole front side. We have a static stretch for the gastroc or your calf, which is found right here. The starting position is this, making sure the toes are pointing forward and the heels are pointing backwards. He's going to drive his hips forward while trying to keep his knees straight so that you feel the stretch into the calf, holding it for 10 to 15 breath cycles. Next, we have a static stretch for the piriformis or the glutes. So the stretch should be felt on the outside right glute. Here's the starting position. The end position is going to look when he pulls his right knee into his left shoulder. End position should look something like this, where you're feeling that stretch into the right glute, holding this for 10 to 15 breath cycles. The alternative stretch would be if he goes back to the start position and instead of pulling up, he bends forward. The end position would look something like this. Again, the stretch should be felt on the outside back of the glute.